Okay, so last week I think the first Descendant appeared on consoles and PC, and yeah, Tom's actually checking it out now. But I heard that it had FSR3 frame generation added, which makes it the second console title to do so. And out of curiosity, I thought I'd spend a couple of hours checking it out yesterday on. I chose the PlayStation 5. This is kind of a bit weird because, well, we know the baseline from AMD where they expect to see frame generation implemented. It starts at it starts at 60 frames per second as their recommended minimum, and it goes, and then you basically reap the benefits of whatever frame generation brings from there, which will vary depending on whether you're CPU limited or GPU limited, right? However, Immortals of Avium came along, which had kind of like a 40 to 60 FPS baseline. And, it basically moved into 70 to 90 FPS. The first Descendant has got 3 different graphics modes and fidelity, which locks to 30 FPS without frame generation. It has balance, which locks to 40 FPS. And then it has a performance mode, which targets 60. And then you can add FSR3 on top of all of those. Even the 30 FPS mode. There's some weirdness going on here. Tom's doing the full coverage. He shared with me some details, such as the fact that you've got dynamic resolution scaling with the FSR3 frame generation off, but it's a static resolution with frame generation on, which means that the balance, you're not quite comparing like with like by turning frame gen on with frame gen off. But even so, I did some assets here. Alex, you've looked at the assets, I presume.
Yes, I have, before I deleted them by accident.
Yeah, they re-downloaded them again. That was great. So here's my perspective. I think it's similar to Vavium. It's built with VRR in mind because there's some weird stuff happening with VSync off in terms of frame times. It seems to work best in the performance mode, which is targeting 60 FPS base. But I'm curious what you think of the other modes because, well, to the eye, it kind of looks right, but you really shouldn't be. I'm guessing with the 30 FPS fidelity mode, that unlocking the frame rate and then doing the frame generation, unlocking the frame rate, setting the resolution static, and then doing the frame generation.
I mean, I like the idea of them offering choice to the users here and kind of allowing the user to test their own limits of what they find acceptable, which is kind of what this is an exercise in, especially in the quality mode, like you're describing there. I think the 30 to 60 FPS conversion for FSR3 is something AMD doesn't want people to be doing unnecessarily, so that's why they do their recommendation at 60 FPS. But I guess, like we've seen in games such as Flight Simulator, the 30 to 60 FPS conversion experience for latency, meh. But, for visuals, as long as the game isn't moving too much, I think it is actually reasonable. It'll break down rather rapidly otherwise. This is a game, though, based upon what I've seen, both less so in your videos, but just from the general coverage of it, it can be pretty fast. And I think maybe that'll break down even more. But I'm just a little bit more concerned about the performance metrics. So the 30 to 60 FPS conversion for the quality mode, I think, falls short in performance of where you'd really want it to be. So every single bit below 30 FPS is going to just due to, well, you have to be on a VRR screen in the first place, but it's just going to have so much more input latency below 30. And then I think the 40 to 80 situation, or sorry, the base 40 going up, do you say 90, right?
It caps at 90, but it's, looking at the asset, it's typically more in like late 50s to 60s. So it's not that much different from I guess it is faster than the quality mode. But, even so, the base frame rate is still going to be low.
Yeah, so I think the base frame rate situation there is just in terms of arc movement and input latency just not in the right place. Even though it has its, I think it has the right idea in mind. If it was actually a really great, constant 40, then it was brought up to mainly 80 by dynamic resolution, I think that'd be amazing. But I'm not actually sure if the Unreal Engine 5 and FSR in general are good at combining these two things with dynamic resolution. Right now with Immortals of Avium, we've seen that they kind of don't use dynamic resolution, right?
No, they don't use it at all.
Yeah, so maybe it's an issue in that aspect where because maybe FSR 3 requires at least a static input resolution for each one, because it's the two frames have to at least be the same. I don't know. Maybe that's the issue, but either way, I would if you're gonna use this, based upon what I've seen, I really think that the performance mode is the way to go on a VRR monitor. But I'm very curious that, like you're saying, the frame times with non-VRR though are being weird when it goes lower.
Yeah, I literally just loaded it, played it, captured it. So
Yeah.
When you look at the performance mode frame generation, there's some odd blips, but it looks broadly as you'd expect it to look. But on the other two modes, it does look odd. So I'm curious to check out what's going to happen with those modes in VRR.
Right.
It should work, but the frame distribution is slightly odd there. Oliver, any thoughts about this? I mean, I guess one of my takeaways is that, it continues to be the case that the actual quality of the frame generation is pretty good, I'd say.
Yeah, it seems pretty good in the shots that I'm seeing, even in the like worst of worst scenarios with a base frame rate of like 25 FPS, not so good, but it looks okay. I mean, I'm definitely seeing some artifacts visually by eye, even without going through frame by frame. Like there's some messiness, some artifacts, especially in fast moving elements or like particle effects or anything like that. Classic FSR3 cases where it's not going to work so well. In general, I have a concern, which is that we're getting too many modes in console games a little bit.
Right.
Because console titles historically have been about giving you a really well optimized experience out of the box without too many tweaks. And I really worry that the pursuit of all these visual modes and toggles might help to obfuscate some performance issues and also mislead players. And in every case, these modes have to be good. I think they have to be good. So I would really rather they kept the modes simpler and had maybe one mode with frame generation, a couple other modes maybe without frame generation, something like that, instead of offering it as a toggle for all visual modes. Because I think in most cases I would take a bit of a softer image over an image with very obtrusive frame gen artifacts, which I think you're going to get at these lower frame rates. And if a game can do 50 FPS with frame gen, that's a very low base frame rate. Certainly when you look at AMD's messaging, they're advertising, you should go to 60 and then do frame gen. What we've seen, you can have good results in games with a little bit more artifacting with like a 40 FPS base frame rate. Here with like a 25 FPS base frame rate, I mean, I haven't played it myself, but I can't imagine it's a brilliant experience. So I'd really rather that developers focus on a couple discrete modes without too many toggles, because ultimately the average player who boots this up, probably they're just going to stick to the default option, right? They're not going to tweak it too much. But if you give players tools to change things, don't give them too many tools to mess things up, because otherwise I just think at that point you might as well just expose the settings menu. Just, because what's the point? You're giving players the options that are not optimal in that case. So I would just prefer that, you give players a more limited variety of options, and also, selfishly, I don't want to cover 12 modes in a console game. Sometimes I do have to cover a lot of modes. I don't want to cover that many modes.
Tom did offer to be on the direct today, but there's so many modes in First Descendant that he's got his work cut out for him, so it's probably not fair to have him on. But I mean, I guess my one, I think, I'm going to test it on VRR, and assuming that, frame delivery is fine, it's probably a good value add, right? I guess my worry here, my concern here is that similar to FSR2 spatial upscaling, we know where it works well. We know where it doesn't work well. And, with spatial upscaling, when we had the launch of Immortals of Avium at 720p scaling up to 4K, it didn't look great. That was not what AMD intended FSR spatial upscaling to be used for. and yet there it was rather. And here we're seeing that AMD's recommendations for frame generation base 60 FPS. Well, maybe 40 FPS does work fine in some scenarios. I mean, it works pretty well in Avium, I'd say, and it seems to be okay here. But to offer frame generation on your base 30 FPS mode, possibly not the best option. And when these experiments start to become standard practice, I think that's where we're heading in a bad direction, I think.
Right.
Yeah, but interesting nonetheless, and great to see frame generation actually implemented on more than one game, which says to me that it's not going to be a flash in the pan, that we are going to see more games get FSR3 frame gen, which I'm broadly in favor of. And also it's a toggle. It's not being enforced on anyone, which again, I think is essential for that technology, certainly in this early emergent stage. But I guess wait until Tom's full analysis is complete. He's certainly got his work cut out for him.
Poor man.
Yeah, I mean, 3 consoles, 3 consoles, 3 different modes, frame gen on off. That's mad.
Yeah,
That's mad.
for a released live service style game, so probably patching in there. I don't want to cover that.
And it's hard to get like for like as well.
Yeah, these type of games.
There are some cutscenes in there, which is how I did that head to head. But I'm not sure it is a valid head to head, because you've got DRS on one side and static resolution. It's like dynamic resolution on one side, dynamic frame rate on the other.